Welcome to Honey in the Rock, a podcast for women. Here we believe in finding sweetness even in the most difficult places. Each story you will hear is a testament to God's faithfulness, showing that even in the wilderness, He provides honey from the rock. Join us as we listen to real, raw, and redemptive stories that remind us of God's goodness and grace no matter what life brings. This is Honey in the Rock, sweet stories from hard places. Let's get started. Before we begin today's episode, I want to offer a gentle warning. This conversation may include discussions about abuse, suicide, rape, or other sensitive issues. These are hard but important topics shared with the hope of bringing healing and faith-filled encouragement. If you find these topics triggering or difficult, please listen with care. Feel free to pause, step away, or seek support if needed. If you or someone you know is struggling, please reach out to a trusted friend, a counselor, or crisis resource. Above all, know that you are not alone. There is hope, there is healing, and there is always grace for your journey. Hi, Sarah.
Hello.
Welcome to the podcast and welcome to the couch.
I'm super excited.
I'm so excited for you to share your story. When we were first starting the dream of this, and we kind of put together our hit list of who we'd love to have on the first season, you were at the top of the list because I don't know all the details of your story, but I know enough, and I know like who you are now.
Right.
And so I know that you have walked through some things. But before we jump into that, will you just introduce yourself to all of the ladies who are listening and tell them a little bit about yourself?
Yes, of course. So, my name is Sarah, right? Okay, that's always the best part. And I am actually married with 3 kids.
Mm-hmm.
I have a high schooler who will be 16, crazy, in like 3 months.
Oh
and
my
then
gosh.
I have 2 little ones. They're like going to be 6. They're 6 and 8, but we are a blended family. So
Mhm.
it's really exciting because I feel like we've grown and learned so much in that process. It's a lot of meshing together.
Yeah.
I grew up in LA. I met my husband, and then he's from Indiana. So we met online. It's hilarious. Completely opposite people. It was a lot of growth. But we've come a long way. And, we both had a relationship with Jesus when we met each other. And we've just continued to just pursue that with our family and our children. And it's been a long road and a great one.
Yeah. You've been married 8 years?
8 years.
All right.
We'll be 9 in June. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Well, let's dive into your story. I'm so excited for the ladies to hear. I love this podcast because it takes us kind of behind the curtain. People see Sarah on a Sunday morning, or they see this beautiful smile, this beautiful woman with these amazing kids, great husband. And I don't think for the majority of people, they know all that has transpired in your past to get you to where you're at today. So let's go behind the curtain.
Yeah, let's do it. Honestly, I think I'm not a closed off person, but I'm definitely like sometimes like, oh yeah, like I can smile. I'm happy to talk to everyone. And then sometimes I'm like, I guess I don't really share enough with people, but I think that's okay.
Well, yeah, but I also think like you share with the right people at the right
Right.
time, because it's not like this is a story that you just always want to
No,
talk about.
not at all. But I'm glad I get the opportunity to share it.
Yeah, well, let us know your story. Tell me your story.
Okay, so when like growing up, I was younger. I struggled a lot at a young age with just like shame and guilt. And, I feel like my personal story is just like how God has really brought me out of that, because that's something I carried up until like my young adult stage.
Mm.
And really my journey of, growing closer to God, even though it was like off and on trying to have a relationship with Him, really brought me to this point of like redemption and knowing that shame and guilt wasn't something that it was never meant for me to have nor to carry. And you know, finding peace in Christ and like having that relationship really like showed me that.
I love that.
Yeah,
Take us back to the beginning.
sure. So, when I was younger, I was like, I had a moment where in my life when I think I was like 4 years old, um, I was sexually abused by one of my uncles. It was one of my mom's brothers, and that really impacted my life because we, it made me shut down as a kid. I seen how,
4 years old.
yeah, yeah, it
Ugh.
was a hard one, and I think what's hard is that like at 4, I think it's like I remembered all of that. I
Yeah.
remembered it was just like it set the tone for me growing up. And I remember how it affected my mom. And I just, instead of like, I felt like I shut down because I didn't want to impact my mom in a worse way.
Isn't
And like,
that interesting?
it
I
is.
guess 4 years old, you feel the responsibility
Yeah.
to protect your mom's
Yeah.
emotions when you were violated so horrifically.
Yeah. It's interesting just because, I think we kind of had like a up and down like environment at home. It wasn't always the safest. Like my mom, I loved her and she's a great mom. Like when, because when she was sober, she was an alcoholic. So when she was sober, you almost didn't want like to do anything to ruin that. You just wanted it to like
Stay as good as possible
yes,
for as long as possible.
yes. And when emotions were like at a high like point for her, that usually often resulted to like a relapse. So for me, when that happened, I didn't know like what to do. I wanted to tell my mom, but I shut down. And eventually like she got it out of me. And I did, share to her like what happened. And I just seen how much it broke her. And I felt like it really broke our family. So from that point on, as a kid, I shut down and I like told myself that I wasn't going to let things affect me anymore.
Wow. A few questions. Was there your dad involved? Were they together, or were you like raised by a single mom?
So my mom and my father split up. They were never like married,
Okay.
but they grew up together. So they ended up just having some like a love and affection for one another, but maybe not in that way anymore. So my father was struggling with his health, and he was dealing with like cancer, and him and my mom were both like recovering addicts as well. So we would visit my dad and stuff. So he was in the picture during that time, but we solely lived with my mom.
Okay. And what's the birth order for you?
So we're 5 girls, but from my mom and my father, I am the second born. So I'm the baby from my like batch
Okay.
per se. I'm like from my batch.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. It's like you're second born, but you're the baby.
Yeah. It's interesting because I'm still like the older one to my siblings, but I am the baby from my batch. So I feel like I still get treated like the baby.
Yeah. Yeah. Gosh. So 4 years old. How long between when the violation happened? I don't know if it was a one-time event or continual before your mom found out and that you carried that alone.
I'm pretty like I will say my mom has always been really good about like it, noticing when something was wrong with us. And
That's
it
good.
wasn't like an often thing for us to go and spend the night with family. My mom really didn't trust people that much. And I think it was just like a one time like thing that she made the like exception. And like going back to that, it was literally immediately because she knew
Wow.
I was just not myself. And she really tried to get to the bottom of it. And I just refused to talk until I think it was about like a couple of days in.
Wow.
And I told her what happened after she was just like, I know something's wrong.
Wow.
So I really couldn't like not tell her. And I appreciate like she pursued me to the point where like she wasn't going to take
Yeah.
no. She knew something was wrong.
Like, way to go, mama.
Yeah. So I definitely think that helped
Yeah.
a lot because, I mean, because of that, she was able to kind of remove us from that family. And then my uncle ended up later on going to jail.
Were you a church going, like Jesus believing family at that time?
We were. My mom like always had us when like in church when things were like when she could.
Mm-hmm.
So she was always tried to go to church, always had us in church. Really, to be honest, the thing that really affected us was just when she had her slip ups, and then everything would just kind of go chaotic.
Yeah.
But we always had like grew up knowing God because we still had some type of fundamental background of like
Yeah.
going to church.
Yeah. Okay. So you're young, really young,
Yeah.
far too young to experience that. And now you have this pressure to not rock the boat of emotions. You want to make sure that you're not the reason your mom
Yeah.
falls off the wagon, and you're carrying shame and guilt, which I love that you said it at the beginning, like was never yours to carry.
Yeah.
And yet so many victims of sexual abuse carry such shame and guilt. Tell me how that kind of impacted your adolescence and growing up, and even how did it impact relationships with men, guys? Like,
Yeah.
get into that.
So, growing up, I would say it really did because it was always in the back of my mind. Like, because of that, I actually chose to that and other things that I experienced with my family. I chose to really just shut down, like, emotionally. I didn't want to be vulnerable. I chose to just, like, if feeling, I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to, like, even discuss it. My mom tried, like, anyone mentioned it. I just didn't want to talk about it. Kind of just wanted to, like, block it out. So I never really processed it. And when I did, when I was alone, I would think about that or something, and I was just gonna cry. And I just realized that I didn't want to feel those emotions, so I kind of shut down. It's a weird thing to think that you can really do that, but I really did like it was like a switch. I just shut off a switch, and I chose that I didn't want to feel anything emotionally or really like ponder on things like that. So I kind of just went through life just not really giving that a second thought. And it really did affect me because deep down I was hurting.
Yeah.
And I was like pulling unconsciously, like reaching for things that were going to help with that were going to keep that in a place of like numbing where I wasn't going to feel that. So kind of fill a void there. And so as I like continued, I got older and I started realizing that there was just like this deep hurt, right? And this like when I was alone, there's just like this I didn't like myself. I felt this like I didn't like myself. At times I was just kind of disgusted with myself and just felt like very unworthy. And that really did affect me because I didn't want to feel those things because then I had to really get to the root, and I knew what the root was. And for me, I wasn't ready to have that conversation. So I just kind of went off in life, like filling a void with things around me, which at a young age, like in high school, was just like finding substances to kind of consume to like numb that pain, whether it was like alcohol or even specific, like sometimes like certain drugs or things like that, to fill a void. And that worked for a while. And, but then, I mean, you can only do that for so long and things start coming up. And so I ended up like getting into a relationship, and that actually, it was like a high school relationship that turned into like out of high school. And, a couple years down the line, like became very abusive, emotionally and physically and mentally. And I just felt very like broken and very stuck. Like I was raised to not ever be in a situation like that. And it's interesting how when you just have no self-worth
Yeah.
and you just don't love yourself, you find yourself in those situations, you know? And it was in a moment where I just realized I was like unrecognizable. But the crazy thing about that is even through that whole process of like, here I am, I'm like between like 16 and 18 when this is going on. And I was still like, I had cousins around me who would go to church and they were like, we're going to go to church. Like, you're going to come. So I was still in youth at that time. I just always just felt this sense like I didn't belong there. Like, I wanted a relationship with God. I just didn't feel worthy to be there. I didn't feel like I belonged. And I now, of course, know like obviously that's not true. But during that time, I just felt like,
Felt true.
yeah, like
Yeah.
how could God love me? Like I'm just like I'm disgusting or I'm like shameful. I'm not worthy. Like my choices. And even that I would, get a word or feel God just prompting my heart, I would just always result back to that. And really, I know obviously now, like all that time, it was really just me running because I just didn't want to. Also, I didn't understand his love, but I also didn't feel like I was like clean or worthy to come to him.
Yeah.
And I would tell myself, like, I'm not gonna go. I'll come when I'm ready, when I'm like living right and I'm
Clean yourself
perfect.
up a little
Yes, like I had
first.
to clean myself
Yeah.
up when that was never my job.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, during that time there were people around me who would like pray with me and pray for me. And I remembered I was in this point where like I was like, okay, I'm going to drop the relationship. I'm going to drop like the bad habits that I have and the partying and the drugs, like all this stuff. And like, I'm going to fully surrender and give my life to God. And I went to like this youth night and I was talking to one of my leaders and I was like, okay, like I'm ready. And I was actually, it wasn't even youth. I think it was like it was kind of like youth, but like young adult too.
Yeah.
Because I was like 18,
Yeah.
17. No, I was 19. Oh my gosh. I was 19. That's a big difference. Well, I remember I was like, okay, like I'm ready. And I was like, I literally I broke up with him and I was like, I'm gonna give my life to God. And then I found out I was pregnant with my daughter. And that like wound of like I didn't have this family growing up and I want to give this to my child was like, oh, let's fix this. Let's try and make this work. And I really just allowed, the enemy to pull me right back in.
So you went back to him.
Yes, and that's when it got really abusive. But so here I am, young adult carrying now even more guilt, more shame, and I just felt unrecognizable,
Wow.
And the interesting thing is I feel like, we kind of we have these moments where I was like, I knew this wasn't right. I knew that I shouldn't have been living with him unmarried, and I knew that my life was far worse than what it was when I was taking control of it on my own. And I kind of came to this decision that I was like, okay, I'm gonna leave this relationship and kind of get my life right. But my story is a lot of rebelliousness. So and it's like you think about it and you're like, oh my gosh, girl, get it together. But it's a lot of like having these moments of like God having a breakthrough in my life
Yeah.
and then me just like taking a step forward and like 5 steps backward again, So there was a lot of moments like that. And
Yeah.
when I left, I was like back in church for a little while and then I just got caught up right back into the
cycle.
yes, the
Yeah.
party lifestyle, the friends, and I just had this constant like it was this constant like battle of like want make like going left or right.
Yeah.
And I was often just met with like, well, I'm not going to be 1 foot in, 1 foot out. So I'm going to go left, which makes no sense. Right. So yeah, that, and then I find myself like as I'm in my 20s and I've been kind of strayed away from God for a while. I kind of made this decision like I'm just going to not like I'm just going to step away until I've cleaned myself up and when I'm ready.
And are you still with this guy?
No, I'm completely so I back to that. I left that relationship. I after it got really bad, I had family around me who just knew something was wrong and kind of helped me with a safe path to get out of that. And I was able to just like pack my bags and I left and I never went back. And during that time, it was just like, I remembered I was seeking God through that time. And I had this pivotal moment where I had a dream. It was my daughter and she was crying and she was just like, why is dad so angry? And why does he hate us? And I was like, I can't raise my kid in this, like to grow up like this.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, God, I'm going to leave this relationship. And that's when I was like, I'm going to, go back to church and get my life right. And that's kind of what happened for a little bit.
Yeah.
Until it just became too hard for me to stick to. And that's when I just kind of decided to leave again and kind of go on this journey of my own, taking control of my own life and making my own decisions, which didn't always leave me in the best situation. So fast forward to like I'm 20, I think I'm like 24 or 23. And I kind of living this crazy life and I'm like, feeling very empty, just really like trying to fill this void and I'm living two different lives. I'm at home, I'm like, really focused on being the best mom and working and doing all these things. But on the weekends when she'd go with her grandparents, like I was just living this life of this promiscuous life and I was just filling a void, like what once was used to hurt me as a child, now I'm filling voids with that. Like I'm just like dating and going out and having, just promiscuous partners that I'm, not in the best relations with.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, like this is leaving me more empty. This is leaving me feeling way worse about myself. And what my remedy for that was just go out again, go out again with my friends and
double down.
Yeah, really. And, now we're just adding more alcohol to that. And now we're adding more things to that. And I really I remember my sister, she was just like, Sarah, I think you need to like slow down. Like, I think you need to take a break. Like, I feel like you're just kind of going on this downward spiral. And I was just like, I didn't want anyone to tell me what to do. Like deep down, I was hurting and I was just struggling, but I just refused any help. And I was just, I know what's best for my life. And I remember this moment. There were a couple of times, like weekends leading up to this, and I remember the Lord just like talking to me, like, this is not what I've called you to do. And I would have these conversations in my car while I'm going out, and I'd be like, God, like, I don't want a relationship with you right now. Like, I'm not ready for this. Like, just leave me alone.
Wow.
And I think it's insane because now all I want to do is hear God's voice. But in that moment, I'm like, stop talking to me. and I remembered like the Lord just being like, you're going to see what it's like to live your life with my hands lifted off of it. And I just remembered being like, I don't care. And it was interesting, like a couple of weeks later, I went out and I ended up getting into this huge accident. And it really just like followed up with, me realizing like, oh my gosh, like my life is literally like gone to crap,
Yeah.
right? Like it's just falling apart. And I just was really sad and just kind of in a depressed state. And I remembered going to work one day and I went in and we had a late night inventory. And when we had this inventory, it was me and my boss, and we usually, it was just us, and we were in the office getting all the paperwork done, and usually we'll stay after hours because it's so much stuff that we have to go through. It's a lot of procedures. And um, it was that day that I actually ended up getting sexually assaulted by my boss.
Oh my gosh.
And it was that moment. It wasn't like all the other moments of me doing it out of my own say, but it was that moment that like really broke me, where it just brought me back to like what I had been through as a child.
Yeah.
And I remember just like going home and just feeling disgusting and feeling upset and angry with the person, but also with myself. I just felt this like huge amount of shame and disgust and like unworthiness, and just feeling like I just didn't have any value. Like there wasn't a point for me to be like here, And I remembered I I literally was at a point of like my whole life, like, well, not my whole life, but like for the past couple of years, I had my daughter, and that was what I held on to. That was what like I felt was keeping me afloat, was that. And at that point, not even that was keeping me afloat. Like I just felt like at that point I wasn't even worthy to be her mother. Like she could do so much better without me.
Wow.
And it was that moment that I just realized like God, I remembered I was just like, God, I don't want to be alive. Like I don't want to be here. I don't want to be alive anymore. Like I'm just tired of this. And I remember just crying, and at that point I was like really contemplating taking my life. And I remember like God just telling me like, are you ready to stop running from me? Are you ready to like, I can take that shame. I can take that guilt. I can take all of this. Like, if you would just stop running from me.
Yeah.
And it was that moment that I was like, okay, I got nothing else to lose. Like, I'm completely just broken. And it was that moment that I went back to church and I started my journey of kind of healing and coming out of this guilt and shame and pursuing forgiveness, not just for like for the people that hurt me, but for myself. Because I, blamed myself for a lot of things. And with that, God really just, it wasn't easy. Like it was really hard. And there were many moments where I didn't even want to go through that process. It's like open wounds all over again, but really I didn't even realize I was walking around like that.
Yeah.
And I just remember there was so many times at the altar, I was just there crying. And there were a lot of like people in my life at that time that really like stepped in and walked alongside me to just be there with me, just to like, while I'm crying at the altar, they're just there with me and just kind of guiding me through it and trying to help me through the struggles that I was going through. And even through that, I still just felt like there were many times that I felt like I still just was not worthy of God's love, or like that I just still carried that shame, I just felt that embarrassment, or I just really couldn't talk about it. And I felt like I was just really unclean. And I remember it was this moment I was at the altar, and I was just crying, and my sister was there with me, and she was like, I really think you need to share this. I had a leader who was a good friend of mine. And she was like, my sister was like, I think you need to share what happened.
Yeah.
And you need to tell someone because you've just carried this for so long and you need to let that out. And that was like the first time I actually opened up with someone, and other than my immediate family, and like shared what happened to me. And I feel like through that first step really created just a chain reaction of like unraveling, kind of like an onion. It was just like layers and layers and layers of just healing and kind of letting that out and understanding like that the shame, like all of that I carried, like I didn't do that to myself.
Yeah.
I didn't take that upon myself, and it wasn't for me to carry or feel guilty about or feel shameful about.
When I'm listening to your story, I'm moved because I'm like, I keep thinking of the book of Hosea and just the multiple times that Hosea, who God asked to marry a prostitute, and you're obviously not a prostitute,
No.
but just the multiple times that he would pursue and pay for her to be his bride again and buy her back and plead for her to come back. And just like it, when I'm hearing your story, I just think, oh my gosh, it's so beautiful how relentless he chased you. I mean, like over and over and over again, even when you flat out rejected him and you're like,
Yes.
leave me alone. Stop talking to me. And he's just like, I'm still like, I love that song, Reckless Love. And it gets like a bad rap sometimes because it's like God's love isn't reckless, but I'm like, that's kind of reckless. Like we would say that's reckless to anyone else in the human world to love someone that continues to reject you, to tell you to shut up, to walk away, to come back and then leave you again. Like we would say that's reckless for ourselves, and yet that's what Christ has done for all of us. And so evident. I didn't know that part of your story, which is so very beautiful. Like his constant pursuit. I think it's so healing to know that even in the midst of all of the shame, all of the guilt, the things done to you, and then in the turn, because you were so broken, the things you did to yourself, and then the more things that were done to you, just all of it, that in none of that did I ever hear you say, and he shamed me, and he told me I'm dirty, and he told me how disgusting I am. It was like in all of the story that you just said, Jesus never once said that to you. He's like, let me clean you up.
Yeah.
Like, I love you. Come back to me. Surrender. I'll help you. Like, I just think it's beautiful.
It is, honestly, like when you think about it, it's interesting because I like completely agree. Like I sometimes am like, I honestly look back and I'm like, he never left me.
No.
Like he was always there with me. And even like when I mentioned earlier, when I'm like, we pray, now we're like, God, just let me hear your voice. And I'm like, I've heard it and I was just like rejecting it. Like, I don't want your voice. And it's crazy to think now, me here, like today, I could never imagine saying that. Like,
No.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And to think like, just to think back in the past and be like, but his pursuit, like of how much he loves us and how important we are to him. And it's, it's that pursuit that like really brought me back to him.
Yeah.
And his voice, and that he never left me. Yeah.
So then you've gone through this, you've come back to the Lord, you're really surrendering and starting your healing process. When did you meet Tyler in this process?
So I met Tyler I met Tyler when I was like 25. So it's about a couple years after. I had
Okay.
already been in church and like at my church for a while. I'd been there for like I think about a couple years, like 3-4 years. And I would say I was about like fully 2 years into my like
Yeah, which
healing
is good
process.
and significant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I met my husband at the time. I met Tyler, and um, we were just friends for like about a couple of 6 months, just talked as friends,
Mm-hmm.
and then later on continued like pursuing dating. And it was really interesting because I remembered I asked him, it's like, "Are you a believer?"
Mm-hmm.
And he said he was, and I was like, "Okay," because I had my daughter, and at that point I was like, I'm not making any like I'm not gonna really, what's the word? Like, I'm not gonna bring anyone into our life who isn't on the right path, who
Yeah.
doesn't want a relationship with God, who isn't pursuing that. Like, that's just not where I'm at in my life. And I was very direct and very honest with my expectations on who, I was considering dating and who I was going to bring around my child.
Which major turnaround. You can tell that healing had happened
Mm-hmm.
because that was not the case before. You're like, any joker can come close to me, but now you're like, I'm starting to have value in myself and see
Yeah.
who I am and Christ, and I have some standards,
Yeah.
which I love.
Right.
I love. So I would imagine that at some point you shared your story with him. How did your, I'm not, maybe not even how, did your past experiences of abuse impact your marriage? Maybe it
Yeah.
didn't. And if it did, like, how have you walked through that?
It did. Like, I was very it doesn't affect our marriage now, but like I'm a very protective person over
Mm-hmm.
my kids. I'm very watchful. And
Understandably so.
yes. And so before I met Tyler, I had been spending a lot of time praying that the person that came into our life would love like my daughter like their own and would see her like their own. And
Mm-hmm.
I was like my biggest prayer that God would bring someone who was safe for us and who would never like I just was refused. I was praying because I didn't want to like that cycle to
Yeah.
repeat in
Yeah.
our life. And when I met my husband, I really just discerned like after a time period, like I didn't discern anything like that in him.
Yeah.
And so I was like comfortable with him being around and spending time with us and like playing with my daughter at the time, and just my daughter at the
Mm-hmm.
time. Now she's ours. But I was still very watchful. And it
Mm-hmm.
was interesting because at first he was just like, "You're so protective. Like, what do you think?" And I had to really have a conversation with him and tell him, like, this is what happened to me. And I just, I'm not comfortable with certain things yet,
Mm-hmm.
And it was the smallest things would be like him just like playing with her sitting on his lap. And I was like, I'm just not comfortable with
Yeah.
that. And when I finally like shared that with him, he was like, it made so much sense.
Oh,
And he
yeah.
was like, and I can respect that and I can understand that. And so he was actually really great with that. Whole process of kind of understanding it and being respectful of my boundaries and till I felt safe enough for a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I think the whole first year of our marriage, I used to sleep at the foot of the bed. When we'd have like visitors over or his family over, I would sleep at the foot of the bed, and Aubrey's room was like across from our room, and I would sleep at the foot of the bed and have my door open where I could directly see her door.
Wow.
And there were just like these things which over time, like, it's interesting because I feel like my husband kind of respecting my boundaries but helping me through it
Yeah.
to a point where it's like she's okay, like she's safe, and really helping me through that whole transition,
Yeah.
which helped me come to a point of being like, okay, like I can let go of control.
Yeah.
Like, I know my kids are safe. I know that God's protecting them. Like, yes, be like obviously like
Be
wise.
cautious.
Yes, and
Be
be cautious.
wise.
But knowing that like my husband is also protective over our kids, and we can do that together. I didn't have to carry that. It was really nice.
Yeah.
And it didn't, I feel like if it affected our marriage a whole lot, Tyler didn't often make it known. Like he really kind of went alongside me and helped me through that.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Good job, Tyler. Hopefully you're listening to this
I know.
episode about your wife.
I'm going to make him.
Yes, good job. Be in a safe place.
Yeah.
I love men who are safe places.
Yeah.
We need more men who understand that.
That's important.
Yeah. You have, I'm still floored that you experienced so much abuse in your life, like in multiple levels, in multiple ways. Talk to me about the process of forgiving those who have violated and wounded and hurt you. And even and then there's the whole aspect of being raised with an alcoholic mother that has its own challenges as well. So talk to me about forgiveness and forgiving those that violated and hurt you.
Okay. So, for a long time, I actually lived this, I guess you would say kind of bitter, and I didn't even realize it. I was very nice, but I feel like I was able to put on a face, right? The face that everyone wants to see and appease everyone. But deep down, I'm just angry and hurt. But, so at some point, during my, it was really interesting because during my journey of healing and trying and coming to understand how God views me and his love for us and his forgiveness for us, and sometimes you think you're at a point where you're okay, I'm ready, I'm at a point where I should be, I forgive this person. And for instance, my mom's brother, I was I forgive him, I just never want to see him, but I forgive him. And I remember I got invited to a family barbecue, and I my experience with that situation was very interesting. But I ended up going to the barbecue, and he was not there, but his children were there who were around my age, and his wife was there. And I didn't know that it was them. And I remember I was talking to them, and my sister was I ended up telling my sister when we got home later on, oh, such and such was there. And she was like, that is Ogir's family. You were comfortable talking to them? And I was like, oh my gosh. And I just felt this immediate, my nerves were all over the place. I felt my anxiety go up, and I just felt this kind of almost oh, I want nothing to do with them. And I was that was my immediate reaction. And I was I remember calling my cousin. I was why didn't you tell me? It's I don't want to be around them. I'm not comfortable with that. You should have told me. I don't want to be around his family. And as I started evaluating it and just letting God speak to me, I remembered kind of being oh, maybe that's an area that I'm really not. I haven't really let God fully work in. Maybe I've come to the understanding that this has happened to me, and I've working through the forgiving myself for it and the shame and all that, but maybe I really haven't forgiven the person, especially if my immediate is never want to be around their kids. And that took me through a process of okay, well, how can I how do I do that, And I just started to really look at my life and how God views me and how God has forgiven me. And I think I started to just be to just understand that I can have that forgiveness. And I just started to pray, for my heart, for God to just kind of come and help me in those areas. And I could have that forgiveness for him and just want the best for his family and just not maybe want to be around them or want them to know anything about my life. But I didn't want to have the hostility that I felt.
Yeah.
And so I came to a point of really just, there were a few other moments where I had interactions with them and I just started to see them as like, it's not their fault. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, and to just like kind of love them from a distance. And
which is absolutely okay.
yeah.
But I like how you
Yeah.
differentiated, like, it's okay for me to have a boundary, like a relational boundary because of what it triggers in you.
Yeah.
But what you didn't want was the hostility, that
Yeah.
instant, like, whoa, oh, what was that just came out of me? That was the telling point that there's some more healing that needs to be done.
Yes.
Yeah.
It definitely, there was, especially because I remember like just shutting down.
Yeah.
And over time, after a couple of years, like it took time, but I just really started to like dive deep into a lot of things that I feel like were like strongholds that I had still not like gotten over. And it was that specific like situation. And then it was, kind of diving into like my assault with my boss and kind of healing from that as well. And really forgiving, but like removing, that obviously there's no connection there, but just understanding that better.
Did your boss go to jail?
No.
No.
He didn't. I did win the case though, the assault case. So.
Okay, good.
And the job did like settle because of it. So it was unfortunate. It's kind of a hearsay.
Aw.
Yeah. But that was one. And then, I think overall, even like my relationship with my daughter's father, like that was a big one. Like I had to really ask God to help me with that every day because even now there's like moments where my daughter will be like, Mom, that came off a little. And I'm like, you're right. I should really check my heart in that area,
Yeah.
But like having to have some type of like civil communication with someone.
Because your
that
daughter has
yes,
relationship with her dad.
Yes, that
Okay.
has like violated me in many ways,
Wow.
And so coming to a point of like being able to, after a couple of years, have established some communication between us that's like civil. It wasn't easy to get to that point.
Oh, I bet not.
Yeah, no. Yeah. But
and
yeah.
having to trust your daughter to someone who hurt you so deeply, physically and emotionally.
Yeah.
Like that would be hard
Yeah.
to hand her over.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Fortunately, she's got amazing grandparents, so they really like take her when she goes. So
That's good.
yeah.
Good.
But that definitely, like, I feel like that has really helped my healing process because not that being faced with something like that on a day-to-day basis is something that helps your healing process, but just kind of like with that specific situation, her father, like having to see that person and like find a way to like move forward, and not have the animosity towards that person, and just kind of, I'm in a place where I'm okay. Like I have healing in myself, and that's even something that I implement in my own relationship with my mother. Like forever, I was like, she was an alcoholic, and when she would relapse, it was this sense of like, we're not worthy of your love, like we're not enough, because you choose the alcohol over us. And I came to a point, and this was during my like, coming to a point of like when I reestablished my relationship with God, was like I came to the understanding like God really opened my eyes, and that it's not that she didn't love us, it's not that that we weren't enough, and I felt that God just kind of showed me like she didn't know what true love was, and she didn't love herself enough. She didn't even know how to get herself out of that. So I had to kind of view my mom in the sense of like kind of a broken person, like how I was before I had God, which I was completely broken and a hot mess. And when I started to kind of view my mom like in this sense of like kind of like a hurt child who's just trying to mend this pain and doesn't know how to love, and it's not that she doesn't love us, that she doesn't really know how to love herself.
Yeah.
And that had nothing to do with us. Unfortunately, we just got caught in the crossfire, but it had nothing to do with us. And it made me have some kind of compassion for my mom. And I feel like God has really shown me to have like just like empathy for people's situations or their circumstances, or and the compassion to just kind of be like, okay, and I think like that helped me kind of forgive others and kind of move on.
I think that's so good, because I think it's so easy for us when we are wounded by people, especially people that are like close, like they're relatives. They're like in your situation. I mean, these are like your boyfriend, your mom, your uncle, your boss. I mean, these are people that you are supposed to trust. And it's so easy as like air quotes, and I don't say that like facetiously, but like as the victims to kind of stand in this place of judgment and get angry and be like, they're horrible people, and just like bring that conclusion. And I think there's something really significant about asking God for his perspective on that individual. And I say that with the caveat of also realizing like getting God's perspective and heart for that person doesn't mean that you, most often, more than not, you don't let them back into your life.
Right.
Like the relational boundaries, or still like charging them and calling the cops on them and doing what you need to do when there's been a criminal act against you, still needs to be followed through with. And it's different than trust. But to get the heart of God and his perspective on someone, I think is so, it's so mature, Sarah. It's a mature thing that you did. And I also think it's such a beautiful sign of healing. And I do think that's how you get over the hump of hurt to the side of healing, is when you get a glimpse of, I love what you said, like when you're looking at your mom, like I just saw the broken child. Like I saw her as the broken daughter, that the ex-boyfriend, the baby daddy, like he was broken and he was hurting others because he was hurting, these, and it doesn't justify.
No, right.
There's no justification for the violations.
Yeah.
It doesn't excuse anything, but it does give you like understanding and compassion, like you said, of like, okay, they're still like, they are broken people, and hurt people hurt people, and broken people break other people.
Yes.
And if we can step out of that cycle, because when we just remain in that place of being broken and a victim, we too, like you even said, like I was abused, and then I started filling it with the very thing that wounded me so deeply. It's like it's a cycle that continues. And I think at some point we either continue down that cycle and let it destroy our lives, and we walk so broken and looking for all the things to numb us, or we choose forgiveness and say, I'm going to choose to heal so that person that violated me doesn't continue to have that authority and power and control over my life. I think that's something that you've done, is like you've stopped the control of their influence in your life, and you broke that through forgiveness and compassion and boundaries.
Yes, the boundaries.
I can't emphasize the boundaries enough.
Yes. Yeah, I will agree to that. Like, I feel like my specific circumstances are a little different. So, I mean, most likely I would have cut the person out of my life. But having my daughter, and
Right.
it makes it a little complicated.
Well, there are women listening here
Yes.
that are in that same situation where
Yeah.
they've also have an abusive ex and a child
Yeah.
with them, and that is hard. And so I just think it's so I think your testimony in this and what you've gone through is so needed in today's generation, because there's just a lot of angry, bitter women who are like, I'm done with men, like screw
Yeah.
men, and it's like they hurt me and I'm never going to trust anyone again. And there's no good men. I see it, I hear
Yeah.
it like all the time as a pastor.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it's easy to see out in culture and the generation too. It's just like, that's just a go-to. And I'm just applaud you for stopping the cycle and not letting their abuse of you be like the final story.
Yeah.
It's, and for anyone listening that is in that, let me just say too, this was a cycle. Like, this was a time, or not a cycle, this was a season of healing. So it's not like, I'm not saying that with like, and get over it today. It's like, this took you
Oh,
years,
years. Yes.
years to heal. But you at least like
Mm-hmm.
started the journey towards
Yeah.
healing. And one thing that I also wanted to emphasize as you were talking, I just want to like point out that one of the things that I noticed was a big like turning point in your world was the confession to someone
Mm.
other than like your family.
Yeah.
Like, I think that is worth like hitting on for a hot second, because I think so many people like walk in this silence and the isolation of shame and guilt and abuse. And it's like, I don't want to tell anyone. I'm just going to deal with it between me and Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
But yet the word of God, I'm not going to tell you the right scripture reference, but it's like, I think it's somewhere in First John, but don't quote me on that, that
Yeah.
talks about like when we confess to one another, we're healed. Like, there's something of healing that begins when we get it outside of ourself and to another human being, not just vertical, but also horizontal.
Yeah, no, it's completely true because I remember when I like said that, it was like something broke that day. You know what I mean? And I just started going through this healing journey of like even like my anxiety, like all of these things that I was dealing with because of this issue
Yeah.
started to break off of me. And I would have like these panic attacks and insomnia, and like it all just started. I remember just God just taking it and not having that anymore. And a lot of that broke when I confessed. And I think the hard part we don't talk about a lot often is um, a lot of times when, we come back to Christ, sometimes we're just like, a lot of people struggle with like being like, feeling like they're like, they belong there. Like they themselves can be there. You feel like you're in a room full of like people who are doing it right.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're here and you have this horrible past, That's just my thought process. Like, and I've met people that have expressed that
Mm-hmm.
too, where you're like, you have this horrible past and you're there and you're like, I have to say this to these people. Like, what are they going to think of me? How are they going to look at me? Like, they're going to know that I carry this, like, this sin or this filth, and I deal with this. And like part of that too, like people don't like when with like sometimes most often with children with, like sexual abuse, it follows with other things.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of like um for me it was like later on I was introduced to like pornography and things like
Mm-hmm.
that you're then now like you're like, oh my gosh, like I have to go confess this to someone, you
Right.
know what I
Yeah.
mean? But you realize that when you do that, yeah, it's scary. And you do feel like someone's going to look at you like you're crazy. But I think that's when you truly understand, like, but not everyone went in there perfect. And we've all carried things in there, and
Yeah.
have all gone through things, and that's just the enemy trying to like hold you back and keep you down and want you to carry that shame and not tell anyone, so that you won't break free from it. And if he can keep us in it, or just keep us like feeling like buried in that shame and that burden, then he's can continue kind of keeping us captive in that.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
But it really did. That was a pivotal moment for me, that just being able to like express that.
Yeah.
It really started my like healing process. And even like with my mom, when I expressed, like I finally had a conversation with her about it, and I kind of expressed to her like, I didn't talk about this with you for this long because I was just so worried about how this would impact you. I just didn't want to hurt you. I didn't want to be the reason for your relapse, or like emotional, instability. And I remembered like her hearing that. She was like, she really understood, and she was really saddened by it, but she was able to hear it.
That's
Like
amazing.
now we have a very close relationship, and so now being able to like have some of those conversations and not carry that and be like, oh, it's on me. It's
Yeah.
not, it's not, and it's okay. So
Yeah, that's huge.
yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. It's it's a journey. It's a lot. I know a lot of people will, probably at some point come to church and feel like they're not worthy, or like it's their burden to carry. And I just think it's, it's not. You just gotta leave it at Jesus' feet and let him fix you. Like, you're not gonna fix yourself.
In the process of surrendering to Jesus, confessing to some like mature saints that are going to help walk, and people that helped walk you through this, was there anything else? Like, did you get any like therapy through this, or was that like later on in life? Was that a part where there are books or were there resources that you've turned to that have like helped you in this process?
So, it's really interesting because I feel like even a lot of time, like we like get saved and we're like, okay, like went through this process. Okay, I've went through all this healing process, and
Yeah.
you're like, okay, like I'm good. And I think sometimes we don't realize that, like, for a while I was like, I'm good. Like
Yeah.
I'm fine. Like, and I remember actually it was this year, this last year, I remember telling my husband like, I I think I want to go to therapy. And I remember my husband just been like, "Well, why? Why do you think that?" And I'm like, "Well, it's I believe the healing is there already. I'm walking in that.
Yeah.
It's more understanding." Um and I would encourage anyone for that, because it's I was like, I want to understand myself better. I want to better myself. And yes, like all of that, Jesus does in me and Jesus can do through me, and I seek God through that.
Right.
And obviously my healing comes from the Lord. Like, it comes from my relationship with God. It comes through my walk
Absolutely.
with God. But I do believe that there's understanding that we can gain from that. And just like with my childhood, and I've neglected emotions for so long. And so at times I'll just have these moments of feeling like a thought or a memory and being like, oh my gosh, like I didn't realize that it affected me that way. And I remember just telling my husband, like, not more so for the, like, yes, there's healing in that, in the therapy, but I really just want deeper understanding, how to navigate some of these things and understand myself better, and why maybe I respond the way I do. So I have gotten into therapy, and I have like a Christian therapist, and honestly it has been amazing because I didn't even realize that I needed it.
Yeah.
I really
Right?
didn't.
I think that's like, I hear you so much on that, because I think when it comes to like a really good therapist, a really good Christian therapist, like, and I'm a big fan of Christian therapists
Yeah.
that are well schooled and know their stuff. But I think like I agree. It's like, I know that Jesus is my healer, but there's also just things I don't know about myself that they've been a part of me for so long. It's been my default for so long. I've never even questioned, like, oh, that's a coping mechanism that served me for that season of my life, but it's not serving me now.
Mm-hmm.
And I had no idea that it was related to that. And so a good therapist will help you unpack all of that and kind of evaluate and help you understand, like, and this was connected to this. And you're like, oh my goodness, like I didn't even, and yeah, okay. It's like taking blinders off that you didn't even know were there. And I think it's a beautiful thing. I love therapy. Like
Yeah.
I'm such a
Yeah.
fan. I mean, I think we give so much attention when we have like sickness in our body to go get the doctor and get the healing and get the medicine that we need. And yet there are trained therapists who understand the mind. They've done so much study on the mind and the emotions that they are like the doctors of the mind. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like, that impacts us so much. So why wouldn't you like want to go and
Yeah.
understand more about how you have processed things through life and how you might be doing things now that are triggered by that and how you can undo that and learn newer ways to cope, newer ways to communicate and process that you couldn't have understood when you were 4 years old.
Right. And it's crazy because my husband's now like, oh my gosh. I'm like, babe, this book. Oh, this. Oh, this. And he's like, oh my gosh, it's so much. No, but I always got a new resource for him. No. But it's interesting because I going through this now, I'm like, okay, I've come out of the shame.
Mhm.
I've come out of this guilt. Like God has really just like, I don't carry that anymore. And you know, l- I've really, every time the enemy throws those like thoughts of like condemnation or like trying to guilt me or shame me, I'm like, no, I rebuke that. I'm not going to even think about that.
Mhm.
But now, like in therapy, I'm like, we've unraveled some other things because it's like an onion. You're pulling all these
Mhm.
layers back, and I'm like, oh, okay. So now, in the midst of all of this chaos of my upbringing, like a lot of this, there's fear that has gripped me and all that. So now we're
Sure.
like coming out of that, and it's amazing though because it's I think in our relationship with Christ, we're always going through a season. We're coming in a
Right.
season or coming out of a season, and there's always growth. And so,
It's good.
yeah, I mean, it's definitely that I would say is my biggest right now in this season has been like therapy has helped, and I would definitely recommend people that and like leaders around us who have we've had like great friendships and leaders and like from my previous church and even
Mhm.
here and like pastors who have just like poured into us, and that has been also just like having people to rally around you and help you through
Yeah.
things or even just relate and kind of just once in a while be like, hey, come on, that's not right, that
Right.
has really helped also. So
So as we kind of wrap up, those who are listening, what's one thing that you want to make sure that they leave with knowing, like that nugget that you want to make sure that you have passed along, even if you've already said it, like that you want to shout from the rooftops to the gals that are listening to this that have also experienced violation and abuse and all the pain.
um I just kind of want to say like you know life has its challenges, right? And we're going to go through things in life. And, unfortunately, some things are things that we shouldn't have to go through. But I think it's important to know, like, we're not alone. And if we have an opportunity to, like, have help or to reach out, to also not choose to go through it alone.
Yeah.
It's so important to to know and like surround yourself with people who are going to uplift you.
Yeah.
But if you don't have that, just to know that like you're not alone and you don't have to carry that. Like that what happened in your life that has deeply affected you and just kind of torn you down, that you don't have to stay there.
Yeah.
That there is always a place and a space and like room for growth. God is with us and he never leaves us and he never forsakes us and he loves us. And I think it's knowing that like you don't have to be a product of your environment, right? Like you can choose to like set the tone, to like change the course of your life. Maybe you're not in control of it. Don't want to take that into your own control, into your own hands, right? But just knowing that like you don't have to stay there. Don't stay in those places, like those places where you fail, where you fall short, or where you've been hurt. Like know that like there's healing, there's forgiveness, there is redemption, and don't stay in that place.
It's good.
Yeah.
Would you close us out by praying for the ladies that are listening?
Yes, of course. All right. Lord, we just thank you, God, for, this opportunity to be able to share with other women out there, Father God. And I just ask that you would just use everything that has been said and will be said by, myself and other ladies to just, speak to women out there who are struggling, who or have struggled, and that you would just, use that your words, Father God, would just, kind of draw them in, and that they would just have some peace and understanding and closure and find freedom in this, Lord Father God. And I just pray, God, for, the Honey podcast in general and what they're doing and for who they're trying to reach, all these women, that they was just, I just pray for freedom and breakthrough.
Yeah.
And in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you for sharing.
Of course.
It's so good.
I'm so glad I was able to do that.
Ladies, thanks for listening and tuning in. Until next time, have a great week. Thank you for joining us today. Honey in the Rock is a ministry of Grace Church in Oceanside, California. Follow us on Instagram and join our community at Honeys of Grace. If today's story encouraged you, be sure to subscribe, share, and leave a review. Remember, God is always working for our good, even if we don't see it. Until next time, may you find sweetness in your journey.